that is hurtful to you, even if you don't have a family. Like, let's just say you're a workaholic, you don't have a family. You have to begin to ask yourself, why is it that I feel like I have to work all the time to the point where I have chronic issues in my health? Those are signs that something's wrong and that we have to start asking some questions. And the question that I would start with is, what is it that I believe about myself that makes me show up this way? And the second question is, where did that belief come from? Those two questions will help you start to really double click into what's at the root of the way you're expressing yourself. I don't typically describe myself based on my resume because I think that the reality is I am a statistically improbable product of God's grace. So to give you just a little peek into what that means, there is an assessment in the social sciences called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Assessment, known as ACEs. And what the assessment does is it essentially gives you the probability that a given child will have adverse outcomes in life based on trauma that they've experienced. And it's on a scale of 0 to 10. And social sciences, they basically say that if a child scores a 3, they're at extremely high risk for things like premature death, addiction, incarceration, all types of things, system dependency. When I took the test, I scored an 8. And that is because I'm an only child, but I was born to a mom who didn't want to have children. She was actually married to my dad for 13 years before she got pregnant with me, but he passed away from terminal stomach cancer shortly before my 2nd birthday. And she got into a relationship with a guy when I was about 5.5. He became sexually abusive to me. My mother became physically and verbally abusive to me. And so I grew up in a situation that was very, very dysfunctional, very hurtful. And at the ages of 9 and 11, I tried to end my life. And I didn't grow up in a church going home. I didn't know anything about God or the Bible or Jesus or any of that. I just figured that whatever was on the other side of death had to be better than what I was experiencing. That's how bad it was. So I give that context because statistically, I should be either in jail or dead, system dependent, drug addicted, based on my background. But God is a redeemer. And so I truly am a statistically improbable product of God's grace. I have had leadership roles in corporate America and a few really big companies. I've been in senior executive roles for like the last 17 years. And I most recently wrapped up a stint as Chief Content and Partnerships Officer at YouVersion, which is the maker of the Bible app, which is a wonderful organization, wonderful mission. But the Lord called me away from that to really focus on full-time ministry and entrepreneurship. And so right now I actually have the pleasure of working with many people to coach them on how to walk in the purposes of God, whether that is in ministry or marketplace. And I'm just having a really good time. I've been married for 20 years. I have 2 boys. They're 14 and 11. And so, I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful, Chris.
That's good. It's really interesting. You took me into the ACEs score. So I scored a 7.
Wow.
And so what's curious about that to me is the question about how trauma shaped your view of the safety of relationships and the safety of your personal identity. To the extent you want, Nona, just talk about that a bit, because I have a very similar experience in that way.
Yeah. Well, I thank God for the journey that I've been on, because I have become very aware of the answer to that question. But as I was, I think, walking through the journey over the last, 15 years or so, I did not realize how much trauma had shaped me. Some of the ways that it shaped me. So for example, I now have language for what I was experiencing from my mom. My mom is very much so what's called a communal narcissist. This is someone who, she has her own really deep wounds from her childhood. And so in many ways, her identity was fractured. And so I was kind of used affirm her own sense of self-worth. So to show you how that looked, like if I came home with a good report card, she wouldn't say, "Wow, I'm so proud of you, great job." She would just get on the phone and tell her friends what a great mother she was, even though she didn't know what my classes were. She couldn't have told you what I was doing at school, but she basically kind of used me to supply herself with a sense of worth. That also took the form of her boyfriend, who was sexually abusive. When I told her what he did, she had him arrested, but on the day of his release from jail, she brought him back home, where he proceeded to abuse me again for years. And so, I was growing up in an environment where I was very, very well aware that I was not wanted. She told me that to my face. I realized that I did not matter because she chose my abuser over me. And so I think the way that kind of showed up in my identity is I became a people pleaser. Like, I became the kind of person that I so desperately needed and wanted to be wanted by somebody, that I was willing to be what I call badly wanted, which is essentially used. And that kind of became my experience throughout my young adulthood. Got into some relationships with people who could not have cared less about me. Was cheated on, was abused in various ways. And I accepted that because the trauma of my childhood, the rejection I experienced from my mom, had kind of taught me that I'm not worthy of more than crumbs anyway. And so I would just say, in summary, I think that my trauma for me caused me to think that I wasn't worthy of a healthy relationship. So, yeah.
And when we think we're unworthy of safety and belonging, oftentimes we move toward the very rejection that we're most afraid of.
Completely. Because it's familiar. It's familiar. Like, I know what it's like to be dismissed, to be discarded, to be embarrassed, to be blamed, to be shamed. I didn't know what it was like to be loved and to be seen and to be prized and to be valued, not for anything that I did, but just because who I was. And so being in a relationship with someone who, cheated on me and blamed me for their choice, someone who told me that I could never do better, it just felt familiar. And so I think that's why we'll choose those types of things, because they just feel familiar to us.
I want to hear more about Lee, to the extent you're comfortable. You talked about how he broke your body and broke your heart. What happened?
So that was my mom's boyfriend. And when I think I was about 5.5 years old, my mom's sister passed away and she had to travel out of the state for the funeral. And I remember begging her to take me with her because, when Lee first entered the picture, I did not like him. There was just something I picked up from him that was scary. It made me uncomfortable. And when I told my mom about it, she basically said, hey, he's a good man. Give him a chance. He'll grow on you. Well, she left to go for the funeral, and the very first night that she was gone, he assaulted me. And when it was over, he said, "You better not tell your mom because she doesn't want you and she'll get rid of you." And so that's what I kind of meant.
How old were you?
I was about 5.5. I don't even think I was 6 yet.
No.
Yeah. And I remember that whole situation. Of course, it was physically painful, but it was just emotionally devastating. And that's what kept me quiet for about 2 years. I didn't say anything because I was afraid that if I did, my mom would get rid of me.
How do you think that shaped your ability to cope with and to negotiate with adolescence and puberty and coming into young adulthood? This happens at such a marked young age, and the trauma is so deep and so real. How do you stay afloat?
Man, looking back on it now and kind of, in December of 2023, I had therapy for the first time. Now, here's the funny thing. I've done self-work for more than a decade, reading books, praying, being introspective, reflecting. I've done all that on my own, but I had an actual therapy experience for the first time in December of 2023. And while I was in the session with my therapist, he did an exercise that was deeply powerful. What he did is he took me back to an experience. He took me back mentally to an experience I had where my mom, and I was an adolescent, but my mom and her boyfriend were arguing about something, and I was in my bedroom, so I didn't know what they were arguing about. But she called me out of the room and asked me a question. And so I answered the question to the best of my knowledge. And I guess my answer was his answer. I don't know. But she lunged at me and she began to choke me. And she choked me to the point where I was losing consciousness. And I don't remember what happened. Somehow she stopped. And I got up and I ran to my room. I closed the door. I locked my door and I ran into my closet and I closed the doors. And I remember sitting on a pile of dirty clothes. And when I was in this therapy session, my psychologist took me back to that moment. And what he helped me to realize that I was not aware of is that that was the place where I left my younger self. Like from that moment forward, I was a different person because that was the moment. Yes, I had been abused sexually. Yes, I had been abused physically and verbally, but it was in that moment when my mother essentially tried to kill me that I became a different person. I became very sensitive to people's criticism. I became incredibly needing of affirmation. I became very needing of other people's choosing me. And so I can remember, as a young adult, as an adolescent, if I was to get grades, I needed it to be all A's. If I was to be in an organization, I had to be the president. If I was on a sports team, I had to be the captain. Like I always had to be the best because I needed to matter. The fact that my mom did that communicated to me at a very deep level that I didn't matter. And so I think that really changed me fundamentally. And I brought that even into my career as well.
Wow. What did rejection feel like in your body?
Oh, man. I think physically there was just always a knot in my stomach. Like I can think back on so many experiences where I expected to be rejected. And so it's like my heart rate was elevated. I felt tightness in my stomach. My throat felt tight. I was just kind of almost waiting for the rejection to happen because the rejection I experienced in my formative years kind of primed me to believe that of course they're going to reject you. They're going to abandon you. They're not going to choose you. They're going to overlook you. They're going to blame you because that was my experience. And so I think I had those physical reactions even ahead of the possibility of being rejected.
I'm so fascinated by all of this because integration in spirit, soul, body is fascinating to me. Just on a level of living in wholeness and transformation, that kind of thing. So if that's what rejection felt like in your body, what did rejection feel like in your mental processes, your cognitive abilities, your ability to like emotionally attune in relationships? What happened?
Well, I will say this. I think that what I experienced as a child, it made me really empathic, but it made me empathic because I needed to be empathic to survive. So for example, my mom, she had a hair trigger temper. So anything could set her off. I could say something that I thought was relatively benign, but it could make her extremely angry. She could fly into a rage. And so I became quite aware of her moods, even the most subtle shifts in her mood. And I had to do that because it was a protective mechanism for me, but I carried that, I think, into young adulthood and adulthood to the point where I could be just incredibly aware of how people were feeling. And I could sense almost imperceptible shifts in a person's mood. Even coming into marriage, one of the things my husband and I have had to work through is, I could be very, very aware that something was wrong, even if he was like, no, everything's fine, everything's fine. I just knew, no, everything's not fine. What's going on? And then he would eventually tell me. And so while that's good in some senses, it's bad in others because you end up doing so much emotional labor all the time for other people, like people who they don't want to talk about what's wrong, but I know something's wrong, so I can't let it go. Or if I do let it go, I'm still carrying the weight of knowing something's wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, it totally does. Did you ever deal with things like codependency and where you became a rescuer in the relationship dynamics? Like, how did that play out?
Yeah, I had a couple of relationships in college where that absolutely happened. And it's interesting because, when I think about my marriage, my husband is a very like stable, whole person. And I thank God for that. Yet relationships I had before him were typically with guys who had their own, brokenness, their own trauma. And I would often find myself in the position of having to help them through their anger, having to help them through, their depression, help them through their anxiety. But then when I was upset or when I was sad or whatever it was, I didn't get the same help. And so I think, again, going back to my childhood, because that's how I was oriented. I was made to be really aware of what was happening with my mom and her moods and how she was feeling. But I did not get that same level of nurture or care.
Wow. Earlier you said I expected to be rejected, and that makes me curious about the role self-sabotage may have played throughout your upbringing. How did, or do you have any recollection of circumstances and motivations where you're like, yeah, I'm actually going to self-sabotage so that I can get what I expect? I'm just curious about that. That resonates with me because I've done that in my past.
No, I have several examples of that where I have preemptively ended a friendship because I expected that they were going to abandon me. And so I would abandon them. Even in the workplace, I can think of situations where, I expected that someone was going to do something to blame me. And so I would preemptively do something to, and it can be considered petty now, but I would preemptively do something to make them look bad. And it showed up in very, very toxic ways. And I thank God for hindsight and growth, because I can look at it now and be like, oh, that was the rejection wound within me that was creating those behaviors. I didn't realize it then because I didn't have language for it, but I do now.
How do we overcome self-sabotage? I'm curious about this because, I've coached with so many people who have great potential, great looking guy, great looking girl, and they get into what looks like a solid relationship, and they end up repeating self-sabotaging patterns because of an innate narrative, I believe. How do we get underneath the hood of that to address the self-sabotage at the root, to deal with it at the root, to deal with the behavior?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, our behavior is essentially an outgrowth of our beliefs. And the way that we start to change our behavior is that we have to change the beliefs that are driving the behavior. But we have to ask ourselves, well, what exactly is a belief? A belief is a thought pattern that has been accepted as true. It's a thought pattern that we have ruminated on, we have absorbed, we have essentially memorized it. It has become a talk track. And so I think self-sabotage essentially results from a talk track that we have not acknowledged and we have not done the work to change. So for example, about 11 years ago, I went on a health journey. I lost 100 pounds through just eating right and exercising. I've kept it off. But before that...
You are crushing it, by the way.
Thank you. Well, listen, I tell people I don't have a skinny cell or mitochondria or electron in my body. So I have to do the work, right? It is not my metabolism. But I remember, I did all the Weight Watchers, the Jenny Craig, the Atkins diet. I did all those things and it never worked. So one day I made a decision. I was like, I'm going to lose weight and get in shape. Well, I went to a social function. And at that point, I had said that I wasn't going to eat, any sugary foods. I wasn't going to eat any fatty foods. Well, I went to this social function and they had a tray of beautiful, soft, warm chocolate chip cookies. Now, that is absolutely my kryptonite. Like, I love chocolate chip cookies. So I walked up to the tray. Now, mind you, I had already said I'm going to lose weight and get in shape. I walked up to the tray. I looked at the cookies. And by the end of the night, I think I ate like 7 or 8 of them. And when I left, I remembered feeling so defeated because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. But the thing I did different in that instance that I had not done before is I actually took the moment to just like pause and rewind and think, what was I thinking before I did that? Like what actually led me to make that choice? And I recognized that the talk track that was running through my mind right before I ate that first cookie was, well, it doesn't matter how hard I work, I'm never really going to lose the weight. And so that was a talk track that I had ruminated on for years that had kept me overweight. What I had to do is I had to literally replace that talk track. Like whenever I heard it, whenever I was in a situation that was tempting me to kind of renege on the commitment I made to myself, I had to replace, oh man, nothing I do is ever going to work, with, if I stay on this path and trust the process, I will achieve my goal. And so now I'm speaking, because what a thought is, it's what we speak over ourselves. So it's words we speak over ourselves. So once I changed that talk track, once I changed that thought that I was speaking over myself, I'm starting to now reshape and remold my beliefs. Now it's not that I'm not going to lose weight. It's that I'm going to trust the process. And that is what led me to changing my behavior. So even when I was in situations that were incredibly tempting, it's because I was changing the talk track intentionally. Whenever a thought that came to me was counter to the goal that I had, I would identify it and I would cast it out. That is what led to the change.
Okay, so this is so great. As believers, I think we read 2 Corinthians 10, we read Romans 12. The thoughts are powerful. Walk us through, in your experience, taking a thought captive. What does that actually mean on Monday morning when the barrage hits the moment we wake up?
Well, I'm going to use scripture to explain that scripture. So this idea of taking a thought captive. Now, to take something captive is essentially to take hold of it and stop it in its tracks. I now have grabbed it and I am stopping it in its tracks. Well, how do you grab something? You grab something with your hands, right? Proverbs 18:21 says, life and death are in the power of the tongue. The word power is actually the Hebrew word yad, which means hand. So when you think about what a hand does, a hand grabs, it holds, it molds, it shapes. How do we take thoughts captive? It's through the power of the hand of our tongue. So when you are thinking, like you're thinking, man, let's just say there's a pornography addiction. Let's just go there because so many people struggle with that. And it's like, man, I can't get free from this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to watch it, but I just feel like this is just something I can't control. Now I have to begin to speak over myself, and I have to create through the hand of my tongue the life, the grace that says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I'm not just thinking it in my head silently. I am speaking it through my lips, and the hand of my tongue is actually shaping and molding reality to what I am speaking. There is power in our words, and we have to reclaim that power and walk in that power.
It's amazing. I'm looking right now at a lexicon while you're talking about this yad, and I love this. It describes it as a sign, a monument, the hand, the strength, the power. Oh my gosh, I love this. The axle.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Phenomenal. So death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who indulge in it, the Amplified Bible says, will eat the fruit of it, whether for death or for life. So what's the call to action then?
I think the call to action is to be very intentional about what you speak over yourself. Because remember, I said earlier that your thoughts are essentially what you are speaking over yourself. This is why we have to take those thoughts captive. Like we have to, because what we speak over ourselves ends up creating our reality. So if I speak over myself that, oh man, I'll never lose this weight, doesn't matter what I do, guess what? I won't lose the weight. Why? Because I have now told myself that I can't do it. So we do have to use, the hand of our tongue to speak life over ourselves, even when you don't believe it. That's the thing. We oftentimes only want to speak what we think is possible, but that's not what God said. God said that we will eat the fruit of what we speak, whether we speak what's possible or not. And so I think the call to action is for us to trust the word, trust the process. It's like, look, we have power that we don't even realize that God has given to us to shape the reality that we're living in.
Yeah, so let's just say someone's pushing back and going, okay, I hear what you're saying, but this sounds so much like Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking. I'm so passionate about this subject because we're talking about truth that is eternal, that is living, God-breathed. Just, can we pop that balloon for folks that are saying, oh gosh, here we go. This is like prosperity gospel, the power of positive thinking, manifest what you want. And we're saying, no, it's not that.
Well, can I first say, where do you think the concept of the power of positive thinking came from? I think too many times we give credit where it's not due. That is not an original idea. That is not something that someone just kind of came up with off in a cave somewhere. That is scriptural. That is scripture. And so, yes, it was kind of diluted and stripped down and made to seem like something that man kind of came up with, but it is actually scripture. We have power, we have authority within the words that we speak. And we have to use that power and that authority to speak life, not just over others, not just over situations, over ourselves. That's a power that God has delegated to us. And he's just like, look, you're praying to me to do something that you already have the power to do. So now we just have to walk in it.
Yeah, and I think where a lot of this breaks down is the power of positive thinking in a secular self-help world says the power is actually within you. And we're saying, no, I lift up my eyes. Where does my salvation come from? Psalm 121. Yeah. That's
absolutely
right. Okay. Well, let's hit this then, because I want to get to sort of the punchline eventually here, but I'm not in a rush at all. I want to hear about what's at the root of rejection then, Nona. What's at the root?
So I will first say that in order to even experience rejection, you have to first have had the hope that you were accepted. Because if you think about it, like, you don't feel rejected from a job you didn't apply for. You don't feel rejected because someone you're not interested in isn't interested in you. You don't feel rejected because somebody else's parents don't call you their son or their daughter. Like, you feel rejected because you applied for the job. You feel rejected because you gave the best years of your life to that person. You feel rejected because your mother or your father doesn't choose you, doesn't spend time with you. And so at the root of rejection is that there is a hope that was shattered. There is a hope. There is a heart that was broken. And I think we've been made to believe this really, I call it like a really bad line of thinking, which is that time heals all wounds. No, time doesn't do anything except pass, right? Like, you don't heal anything by just letting time pass. It's what you do with time. And so the root of rejection really is an injury to our heart and an injury to our hope. And so this is part of the reason why part of my ministry is really helping people to see rejection the way that God sees it. And it's a very counterintuitive way, but it is that rejection is a gift. And it's not that the pain is a gift, right? Like, the pain, we don't want the pain of it. The pain is not the gift. It's what rejection can teach you about yourself and about other people. That is the gift. But we never get to that because we're so focused on the wrapping paper. The wrapping paper is the pain, and we just stay on the wrapping paper. But there's a gift on the inside, and I think that's what God wants us to see.
You said something, and I want to just unpack this with you. So I read Hebrews 6:19, and it has been so cornerstone in my life. Scripture says we have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, the mind, the will, and the emotions, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf. You said rejection is an injury to our hope. That is so powerful to me. Perhaps you could spend a little more time talking about the lethal nature of rejection that we don't deal with, that settles down into on a spirit soul level and crashes our potential. I mean, I look at both of those. Again, your statement, rejection is an injury to our hope. and we have this hope. It's a sure and steadfast anchor to the soul. I want to stay there. What do you want to say?
I love that our hope is a sure and steadfast anchor to our soul. So if you think about it, when that hope is shattered, it shatters what should be anchoring our mind, our will, and our emotions. What does that look like? I believe that rejection gets expressed in one of two ways. We either explode or we implode. So when we implode, I'll start there, it's usually something that has to do with self-harm. It's depression. It is addictions. It could be literally physical self-harm. People who implode are the people that others look at and say, why can't they just get it together? But what they don't know is they're nursing a rejection injury that has caused them to turn their pain in on themselves. Now, that's implosion. When we explode in one of two ways. One is into anger. There are some people who, because they've experienced rejection, they carry a hostility around. They carry this bitterness around, and that can show up in yelling and being very overbearing, very aggressive. You know, whenever I see someone who is just difficult to get along with, I immediately wonder, man, who rejected them? Because that explosion it's kind of like a protective mechanism. Like, I'm lashing out because I don't want anybody to get close enough to hurt me again. So that's one form of explosion. But the other form, which can be perceived as the more virtuous form, is we explode into ambition. So there are people who are very successful. They're driven, they are never satisfied. Like, it doesn't matter what they achieve, they gotta achieve more. That is an expression of rejection, because what they're doing is, whereas the person who explodes into anger is trying to keep people out so they don't get hurt again, the person who explodes into ambition is trying to be seen as worthy. They want people to say they matter because somebody said they didn't. And so those are the ways that I think when that hope is shattered, it does a work on how we show up. We can either hurt ourselves, we can hurt other people, or we become so ambitious that nothing is ever enough and we're never fulfilled.
How do we recognize the root of rejection in the first place? Like, if that's been present for so long in our life, let's just use your example as the case study, 5.5 years old. It's been present for so long that we've almost been habituated into that as our normal.
Correct.
How do we even recognize
Yeah, I think one of the unfortunate parts of a kind of long-term rejection experience is it can be perceived as our personality. Like, that's just how I am. No, that's not just how you are. It's not just how you are. I think we start to get to the root by first acknowledging that if you are showing up in a way that is harmful to you or others, that there is something that needs to be explored. It starts with recognition. Like, you can't change what you don't acknowledge. And so we may say, and I want to go ahead and address this, some people may say, well, I'm not really hurting anybody. I'm just tired all the time because I work all the time. That is hurtful to you, even if you don't have a family. Like, let's just say you're a workaholic, you don't have a family. You have to begin to ask yourself, why is it that I feel like I have to work all the time to the point where I have chronic issues in my health? Those are signs that something's wrong and that we have to start asking some questions. And the question that I would start with is, what is it that I believe about myself that makes me show up this way? And the second question is, where did that belief come from? Those two questions will help you start to really double click into what's at the root of the way you're expressing yourself.
Yeah, because there's a difference in the internal narrative between I have been rejected and I am a
100%. And I will say this, that saying, hurt people is absolutely true. More often than not, the people who perpetrate rejection have themselves been victims of rejection. That's why even with my mom and what I experienced as a child, like, I forgive her. I mean, we're not in a relationship because, she's unrepentant and she just can't get to that place. But at the same time, I recognize that she showed up the way she did because of what happened to her. So yeah, hurt people. But here's the thing. Healed people heal people. Like my ministry is vulnerability because I know that healed people heal people. So that's my hope for people is, look, as you get to the root of what's happening, you will become an agent of healing for others.
I do want to talk about this phrase, the gift of rejection. That's a hard pill to swallow, but within your work lately, you've said this: greatness and mediocrity are separated by one thing, how you respond to rejection. So let's even kind of shine that against what we said moments ago about how having been rejected in life is an event, but I am a reject is an identity.
Yeah.
Push those things two together and talk to us about responding to rejection regarding the outflow of life.
So I think the reason why, and first of all, let me just tell you, this idea that rejection is a gift, that is not something I came up with. That is literally something that God spoke to me. And when it was first said, I remember being like, no, it's not. Rejection's not a gift. It hurts. It's painful. Like there's nothing good in rejection. But what essentially happened is, and I'll give you the abbreviated version. I was in the book of 1 Samuel. I was reading, through, I think I was in like chapter 16, when Samuel was commissioned by God to go find this man named Jesse because he was going to choose one of his sons to be the next king of Israel. And, there's a scene where, Samuel tells Jesse, all right, bring your sons. 7 of the sons get the memo. Samuel looks at all of them and he's like, none of these have been chosen. Are these all the sons you have? And Jesse says, oh, they're still the youngest. He's out there tending the sheep. And I read that and I thought it was interesting because I think I was in a situation at that time that was very hurtful. There was a rejection experience. And so you know how you can read scripture in one season and miss things because you're not in a space to receive it? Well, because of where I was emotionally, when that kind of showed up, I was like, wait a minute. So Samuel told Jesse to bring all of his sons, and without batting an eye, Jesse says, oh yeah, he's out in the field tending the sheep. So it wasn't that he didn't know where he was, it's that he didn't invite him. Like he just didn't invite him. And I saw that and I thought to myself, man, that really sucks. But it turns out that his youngest son is named David, and everybody knows the David and Goliath story. Well, when I got to that chapter, the next chapter, and I'm reading David and Goliath, David tells Saul that the reason why he feels he can defeat Goliath is because he said, well, I've been keeping my father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and would take one off, I would attack it, I would kill it, and the Philistine will be just like one of this because it was the hand of the Lord that protected me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear. So in other words, David's out in this field by himself, tending sheep, fighting off lions and bears by himself because he's rejected into this place. He's isolated into this place. And it just so happens that those are the necessary preconditions for him to defeat Goliath. So when I saw all that and the Lord really gave me that revelation, I was like, you know what? You're right. Like David's rejection actually became the training ground for his purpose. And so I started to look back over all of the rejection experiences I had experienced, whether it was my mom and my career with romantic relationships, and I could tease out gifts in every single one of them. And so that became the entire thesis of the book, because I was like, man, if we can get this, it changes everything. And so now I don't have to be the rejecter. I can actually be someone who helps the rejected get to a place of healing. And so that has become the mission.
Yeah, so talk to people who are struggling then with the fear of rejection, and they're like, I don't want this to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. When people are paralyzed by fear, what's your advice?
Well, here's the thing. We fear what we hope will not happen, but we should understand that rejection will happen. Like, it's going to happen. It's part of the human experience. So instead of fearing that it will happen, we have to prepare for it to happen. So I'll give you a concrete example. It's so funny, you know, as I'm releasing this book about rejection, I have experienced so much rejection. And I'm talking about from people that I just knew I could count on, people who whose projects I supported, endorsed, promoted, who when I was like, hey, you know, could you endorse this? They were like, no, or they didn't respond, or things like that. Now in the past, those situations would have crushed me. And I should say, I am the type of person that I really don't like to ask people for help, because I do, in some ways, I do expect that rejection experience. But I'm at a place now where it's like, look, one of the gifts that I share in the book, and I'll just kind of give it as a teaser, is that the gift of rejection reveals people's role in your destiny. So
say that again.
The gift of rejection reveals people's role in your destiny. So when somebody walks away from you, and I'll explain it this way. There are two types of people in your life. There are those who are attached and those who are assigned. When a person is attached to you, they are connected to you for as long as the relationship benefits them. Like, as long as you're channeling benefits in their direction, they are for you. They are there. They are happy to be by your side. But the moment you stop being a benefit to them, they'll start to detach. And what happens is when they detach, it triggers our insecurity. And so we start to say, what can I do to get you to stay attached to me? What can I do? How can I change? What do you need? It triggers our insecurity. But then there are people who are assigned to us. And those are the people who are not in our lives for what they can get out of us. They're in our life for what they can contribute to us. And when that person starts to detach, what we do is we shift our energy away from the people who are assigned to us to try to keep people attached to us, which is the worst mistake you can make, is giving assignment energy to an attached person. And so God uses rejection. He doesn't create it, but he uses it to reveal, are people attached or assigned? He reveals it, because there's no other circumstance where you would really know, is this person truly for me? And so once you make the discovery that they were attached, now it puts you in a position to accept that fact, and you can recategorize them. Like, oh, you're not who I thought you were. That doesn't mean I have a grudge against you, but it does mean that I no longer expect you to be who I thought you were. That becomes the gift. It's painful at first, obviously, I've been there. But once you accept the fact of a person's position in your life, now you can make different decisions.
That is so powerful. And as we begin to land this plane today, I want to ask you about boundaries in relationships and their role in rejection. How did those shape for you? How did they change? How did dynamics in relationships change as you discovered which type of person each person in your life?
Oh man, that's been one of the blessings, because as people who have been attached to me have been revealed, I have been able to shift my energy to people who are assigned to me. And so the boundary becomes, if you need my help, I will still help you, because that's who I am. And I know I reap what I sow, not what you sow. So if I can help you, I will still help you. At the same time, I will not allow you to use me. Those are completely different things. When we allow people to use us, it's out of fear. It's, I want you to be my friend. I want you to like me. So I'll do everything I possibly can to make you like me. But if I can help you, I'm not as concerned about being liked by you as much as I am concerned about sowing a seed that will reap a harvest. Those are two very different orientations.
What I love about you, my friend, is that you carry this eternal perspective, this kingdom perspective on how to negotiate with everyday circumstances in life. Because even what you just said, what I pull from that is your ability to see the ramifications now and in the future. And I think that's maturity. And I think, folks, listen, lean into this. We talk about this all the time on this show. Spiritual maturity is the greatest passion of my life. It is the call to us as believers to stand uprightly. You've given us gold right there, Nona, because we've got to look near and far, what I heard you say, in the dynamics of relationships and make wisdom-based choices for those relationships. Here's where I'll land today. Okay, so folks are saying, all right, wow, Nona, there's a lot to unpack, and folks, listen, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to Nona's brand new book, The Gift of Rejection. It's a masterpiece, and I mean that. Leaving this conversation today, finish this sentence then, Nona. Now what? What do I do? What do the folks do? With this information that we've gained today, what's the next right move?
I think it's an opportunity for introspection, and it kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier is think about what are the ways that I'm showing up that I don't want to show up this way. And begin to ask yourself, what is it that I believe that's making me show up that way? And where did that belief come from? I think it's an opportunity to start to ask some questions of yourself and start to bring to light those things that are hidden. Rejection in many ways is kind of like a glacier because there's just so much hidden beneath the surface.
Yes, ma'am.
That we don't explore. And so I think that's the next step.
Transformation doesn't happen in one day, folks. It happens every single day. Nona, thank you so much. I mean, you are a gift. I got to get you out of here, but real fast, tell folks how to connect with you, all things Nona Jones Ministries. You are a gem,
I appreciate you. Back at you. You can connect with me. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. My handle is at Nona, not Nora.
So good.
On all those platforms. And of course, you can visit nonajones.com to learn more about what's going on in my world and order the book.
So good. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.